My crazy ex-boyfriend got obsessed with me. Part 3. Love is the most dangerous thing in the world. Nuclear, arsenic, disaster, etc. Do not compare to what love can do to you. That moment of realizing that love I thought was pure was not, came and tore through my soul. Almost in a daze, I walked into the room and started looking through the contents. And with each thing that I discovered, I felt my heart breaking anew. The man I loved, who was the gentlest soul, was hiding things from me. Everywhere I turned, there were pictures of me. Some of them had been taken from my social media platforms, and others I did not even know still existed. The alarming ones were those of me on the bus, engrossed on the phone, going to work, getting out of my old apartment, and hanging out with my friends. He had been watching me for a very long time, but it seemed like he had only started following me the year we met. Some of them had notes about my favorite places to hang out, my favorite food, etc. And there, barely noticeable, was my yearbook, with 2 pictures connected by a line, me and another guy. I checked the name and I could not believe it. Frank had been in my grade, but we never talked. He was always seen as the weird kid, but I never thought much about him. But now that I had looked more closely at him, I saw that he was Paul, only much thinner. His middle name was Paul, and that was what he had been going by when we met. He went by Frank at school. I had little to no interaction with him, so why was he so obsessed with me? I was so engrossed in this mystery that I could not look away. There were my journals I thought I had packed away. I looked through them and I saw that he had made notes in the margins. There were encounters that I did not even remember, from when I would hate how certain people discriminated against those who were not straight, thus discouraging me from opening up about my sexuality, to when I came out and certain people made me feel bad. Every time I had ever felt like I was not safe around someone or bad around them, he had highlighted their names and descriptions. While my mind processed it all, my heart could not accept it. Maybe it was just an investigation, but why was there a literal shrine to me? And why was he reading my journals? I did not know, but I had to get out of there, and possibly call the police. If I sneaked out and locked him in when I was gone, then maybe I could get help. I was not safe around him, and I was beginning to see why Javier was not the culprit in all of this. "My love, what are you doing?" "I told you not to go into my room," he said. I turned around and saw him leaning against the doorframe. For the first time, the sight of the man I loved brought fear coursing through my veins. I dropped the journal I was holding. "What is all this, Paul?" "Just my investigation room. I told you it was private." "I love you, but you do not trust me," he laughed lightly. But I caught the darkness that flashed through his eyes. I was rigid. "Right. Let's go back to bed, shall we? I just got in here 2 seconds ago." My voice raced against my wishes. I made to slide past him, but he pushed me back and I fell with incredible force. "No, I cannot let you. Now that you've seen my room, I need to know that you can trust me." He cocked his head. "Yes, of course I trust you. I just wanted to clean the room for you. And it was so cute that you have all these pictures of me." I forced a smile, but my heart was thundering. "You're not supposed to find out about this. I was going to stop once we moved away from here, and no one could hurt you." He had a look of madness in his eyes. It sunk into me, tying knots against my heart and stomach. "You hurt innocent people. What is wrong with you?" The act slipped. I could not keep it up anymore. "No one died. It was just a few lessons. You hated them, as I did. Does that not show you? I love you." He came closer to me, but I kept on backing away. "You are mad. Madly in love with you. I told you I would always protect you. It's me and you against the world." "How so, Paul? Or should I call you Frank?" I asked. "I guess I have a lot of explaining to do." He stopped walking and stood in front of me. For the next couple of minutes, he boasted about his plan that he had spanned several years. He had been in love with me for several years. He would follow me everywhere that I went. That's how we found out I was gay. But he was too shy and not confident enough to feel worthy of me. So we swore that I would be his one day, and he would be able to protect me from everything. I told him that he did not need to protect me. Times were changing, and the town was different from years ago. But he told me that anyone who caused me harm deserved to feel the pain. He had gotten stronger, become a cop, and looked for me again. I did not recognize him. We fell in love, and he planned to whisk me away, but Javier got in the way. Then, at the wedding, the way Uncle Davy acted triggered him, and he attacked him. He had trained in martial arts after all. Then, the attacks began when he saw that he could get away with it. He got assigned to the case to mislead the investigators. He was truly a diabolical mastermind, and I was sickened by him. All the scheming and plotting. He was not in love with me. He had a sick obsession with me. When I found out about the tracker, which he had been using to make sure I did not fall for someone else, he knew that he had to find a new way to get me away, so he framed Javier. It was then that he removed the sling from his hand, which was working perfectly. "And now, what are you going to do?" I asked. "I cannot have you," he began. "No one can," I splat. He nodded. "This reminds me of the story of Bluebeard. I thought you could save me, love me, but you see me as a monster, do you not? The look of disgust in your eyes. I cannot bear to see it. What are you planning?" "To let our love be immortal." He went over to the drawer and took up some pills. He gave one to me, and the other one was his. "No. Do it, or I will have Javier beaten up. I have the power," he dared me. "Please do not. I love you. We can work this out," I lied to him. His eyes filled with mirth, and then he shook his head. Took my pill and opened my mouth. Then the door was kicked down, and there was chaos. One minute, his scent was enfolding me. The next, it was completely gone. It was the police. Somehow they had managed to get there, and they were restraining him. He screamed as he looked at me, telling me that he loved me and that it was not over. I was traumatized for a few days after that. But then I was finally okay. Javier was there to walk me through what had happened. Seeing and touching him had got me so emotional, and all I could do was cry and hold him. And he let me. He explained to me that he had pleaded his case for several days, and no one listened to him. He had never been to see Paul that night, and once they looked at the footage from his apartment, it was confirmed that Paul was lying. They hurried to get to me before we left, before he did something to me. He confessed to all his crimes and was put in jail, and would be convicted soon. It was incredibly difficult for me to process it all. The look of insanity in his eyes haunted me for days to come. But over the next couple of months, Javier was with me, and I started to notice my old feelings for him, which I was sure were gone, resurface. But it was not the time for me to be thinking of that, as Paul was being put on trial. He was found guilty of all crimes and sentenced to 15 years in prison. When I had to testify against him, I saw the Paul I knew staring at me, but I noticed that his gaze was greedy for me. He told me that nothing would ever separate us, right in front of everyone, but he would not be able to get anywhere near me. Javier told me that I could not go back to the apartment. It reminded me of a lot of what had happened, and it had evidence of the crime, so I stayed with Javier for a very long time. When I would wake up in the middle of the night shivering, he would be right beside me to hold me. Something about him told me he was safe, and I knew that he would never hurt me. But it took a while for the trust between us to develop again after how I had doubted him. Slowly, the silences were filled with words, then laughter, then pranks. The hugs lingered and the gazes were not scarce. One of our close friends, Tracy, confronted me about it one night while we were out. "So, are you two official? He finally told you how he felt?" she asked. "What do you mean by that?" I asked. "He's been looking at you with love-struck eyes for years. Did you not see it?" "Oh dear, you're blind," she shrugged. But he had never said anything, just supported me in my relationships. Maybe the chemistry between us was not one-sided anymore, and I was starting to see who we could be. But then the flowers and notes started to arrive. The first one said, "I will always love you, PK." I threw them away and did not say anything to Javier. One night, I decided to say something to him about my feeling because I could not keep it in any longer. "Do you still love me?" I just said without anything leading up to it. "I will not beat around the bush. Yes, I still love you," he said. My heart clenched. "But why did you never say anything?" I asked. "You always met someone new, and you saw me as a friend. I ignored it, but it is getting difficult now that I spend more time with you. We share the same bed," he said. We had never discussed me moving out. I don't think either of us wanted that. "Love you too." "Are you sure?" "Even after so many years, you've always had a place in my heart. Now I cannot ignore it," I confessed. His eyes lit up, filling me with tender love. I wanted to freeze that moment, live in it, forever. I'd been so blind for such a long time, but no more. As if connected by a string, we found ourselves inching closer to each other, then connecting. He was still the same, yet different. When we were young, it had been that dopamine-induced love, innocent, but this kiss was so much more. We shared our pain, our truths, all in a few moments. I listened to his heartbeat long after he had fallen asleep, and I knew that I'd been wrong all along. I thought I knew love, but it had been an obsession. He had probably loved me for as long as Paul obsessed over me, but it turned out differently. He waited until I was ready to love him, as he deserved to be. I could not stop crying as the emotion rushed over me. He woke up and kissed me on the forehead. "You're safe," he said. Waking up the next morning was so magical. When his eyes opened and he looked at me, I could not help but smile. Things between us fell into peace so quickly, and we both changed for the better. I decided to cut ties with my family completely. I could never be who they wanted me to be, so why keep on trying? I had nothing to do with him. It was my own choice. We decided to move away from the town. So much had happened there, and we could not easily let it go. After that, we focused on little blessings, quiet nights and pillow fights, taking care of each other when we knew we were not feeling well, laughing and crying together, but most importantly, fighting and being brutally honest with each other, because we were best friends above all else. We advanced further in our careers, and 5 years later, we were going strong, and I had forgotten about Paul and his subtle threats. That was until I started to receive flowers, text messages from an unknown number, and gifts. They were not really gifts though, just things that I had left in the apartment. I asked Tracy, who was still living there, what had happened to Paul. What she told me chilled me to the bone. He had managed to escape after being denied parole for the second time. This time I had to tell Javier about it, and once again, a dark cloud hung over my life. We did everything we could to stay safe, made sure we always knew each other's locations and locked the door when we were in, but he continued to taunt us, and I was afraid. No one knew where he was, but the cops were doing all they could to find him. It was so strange. Maybe it was divine intervention, but whatever laws governed the universe were on my side that morning. I took Javier's car one morning as mine was not starting. I started to experience problems with his car as I was driving. Not only that, but I suspected I was being followed. He had taught me how to stop his car when the brakes failed. It was a bit old, so I drove off to the side of the road quickly, and then a car sped past me, swerved, and fell over the bridge just 2 meters away from me. I was now parked sideways, but had I continued to go through the bridge, it would have slammed into me, and I would have been involved in a crash. I got out and ran to the edge to see, and there, floating in the water, were so many flowers. The same flowers that I had been sent. By the time I called 911, the car had sunk. They managed to retrieve it, and they found things that belonging to him, but they never found Paul. There was a small chance that he had survived, but it was most likely that he was gone. I hoped that he would remain gone for everyone's sakes, and thus the saga of my crazy ex-boyfriend ended, finally. Maybe he really loved me in his sick, twisted way, but it was a doomed love. He did not have any family that could be tracked, so no one mourned for him, but I did. Not the crazy mess he had become, but for Frank, who had a difficult childhood. If only things had not turned out like that. Any one of us could have been him, desperate for love. With him being gone, sun rays shone on my love for Javier. I proposed to him a few months later. I was certain that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. I wanted to make more memories, have our own family, and fight with him for the rest of my life. I do not know if there's such a thing as a soulmate. Maybe not. But it does not matter, because I picked him, and he picked me. When we made our vows, we had only one very important one. I will always love you purely. Life threw a few challenges our way, and we learned that love was not perfect. But that was what made it even more worth it to wake up every day and still say, I love you, no matter the situation. We did eventually buy our own home and started making plans to extend our family, and never again did Paul appear in our lives. I guess he chose to remain buried wherever he was. It is sometimes difficult to tell who loves you and who does not. It may be hard to tell between toxic obsession and true love. Be wise. People hide secrets and show only what you want to see. But real love will always stand the test of time, while toxic love will rot and eventually announce its presence. True love is safe. Toxic love is the most dangerous thing in the world, and it can be difficult to tell, but the universe will always let what is pure rule over what is dark. Paul loved me, darkly, but Javier will always love me, purely. The end. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.